Okay, I think we're going to get started. Thanks everyone for coming today. My name is Sandy Hollenhorst. I am president of the Macias Wildlife Society. We actually have four of us here today. Lorraine Tyre, who's our director, Barb Jackson, who is our treasurer, and Penny Finley, our vice president. So you got a good showing from our group today. We are a nonprofit organization, the Macias Wildlife Society. We do have some little brochures out by the donation box if you want to grab those on your way out. We were formed in 2018 after Ann Macias passed away. Ann was an avid photographer. She also photographed events for the Community Association. Ann and Penny Finley, Dr. Finley, got together in 2013. Dr. Finley is a FGCU professor of education. She would bring her students here. We would teach her students about a bird, and then that would get reflected out to the local elementary community. When Ann passed away, she asked us to keep the program going, and that's what we've been trying to do. However, as everyone knows, COVID set back the schools quite a bit, so we are looking at other opportunities. In fact, at the end of this month, we're bringing some fourth graders here for a tour of Estero Park, and a couple weeks ago we had the environmental teachers from the Lee County schools here because they're interested in coming and doing a little tour of Estero Park and having us do programs there. So we're still looking for ways to reflect out all of the wonderful nature and photography that we have here in Bonita Bay. And I know many of you are donors too, have contributed, so thank you very much. And we do have an event coming up April 25th at the home of Sharon and Steve McCrae. They live right on the shore of the North Bird Island. We did an event actually in November, poured rain, the birds still fly in, but right now they're starting to nest. So it's a really great opportunity to see some of the nesting birds too. So if you're interested in that, just let me know. So today we're going to talk about white wading birds. Actually, Lorraine pointed out to me that the cattle egret really isn't a wading bird, but it's white, so it's in here anyway. But these are all the birds we're going to talk about today. The great egret, the snowy egret, the juvenile little blue heron, the cattle egret, white ibis, wood stork, the great white heron, very unusual bird, the American white pelican, and the white morph of the reddish egret. So the great egret is a magnificent bird. You've probably seen it around. Very recognizable by its long spear of a beak that's yellow, yellow-orangish in color. They're tall. They're about 3.3 feet tall. All their plumage is white. Some of these white birds have black-tipped wings, but this bird is all white, and it has the black legs and black feet. So it's pretty easily recognizable, and you can't tell the males from the females, really. They really are identical. It was chosen in 1953 as the symbol of the National Audubon Society. And actually, Lorraine and I both volunteer out at Corkscrew Swamp, and so we have little Audubon patches on our uniforms, and it is the great egret that is on that patch. Big wingspan of 4.5 to 5.5 feet, a beautiful bird in flight. And they do fly very slowly. They look like they're flying slowly. It's only 2 beats per second. And they cruise, though, at about 25 miles an hour. So these are really very efficient flyers. You can see, too, the neck is kind of held in. That's common with herons. They kind of pull their neck in. And of course, this was their magnificent breeding plumage. We'll talk about it later, but these birds were almost decimated in Florida, actually in all over the U.S. They were hunted for these beautiful plumes, for hats, ladies' hats. 1890s, a woman in Massachusetts finally realized that these women had all these feathers on their hats, and she wondered where they were coming from, and she helped enact the Lacey Act, and then that led to the Migratory Bird Act. It's now a federal offense to transport feathers between states. So it really has brought back, but they probably aren't nearly to the peak they were back in the 1800s. And so magnificent bird. This is part of their mating routine. They do a lot of this stretching of their neck and displaying during the breeding season, trying to attract females. And you'll notice the eye here. We've got some close-ups of this, but you'll see even in this photo, the skin around the eye is green. It's almost like a chartreuse color, and that's the it's called the lores, and they turn green, bright green like that in the breeding season. So this is a magnificent bird this time of year. This is the skin you can see here that's green here in this picture too. And then they do all sorts of wonderful mating dances. This is actually a photo that Lou Gidding took up in the salad bowl. And there's a lot of ritual that goes into this breeding, and this is really a great photo. The male starts the nest to attract the female. You'll see him oftentimes sitting on a couple of sticks. It's not it's not really a fully formed nest, but they kind of like to show that they can find sticks. I think we call sticks bird jewelry. If the male brings a stick and she accepts it, that's a big deal in the bird world. And then they start all their posing and breeding posture, and then they will breed, and they do nest here in Bonita Bay. It takes them to mature to about 2 or 3 years of age before they can breed, like a lot of these big birds. The nests can be very large, up to 3 feet across. They can lay up to 6 eggs at one time, but these eggs are laid sequentially. Ducks lay their eggs sequentially, but then they don't start incubating them until they sit on them. So that's why all the little ducklings are the same size. With these big birds, they lay them sequentially, and they do sit on them. So you're going to see birds of various sizes in the nests on a lot of these herons. Both the males and the females incubate the eggs for 23 to 26 days, and then the hormones change in the birds and the color starts to fade. That's why you only see the breeding colors right before they actually have the babies. And then both parents feed the chicks by regurgitation. This is a picture taken right on the bird islands here in the Bonita Bay, the North Bird Island up by Sandpiper, and they kind of tend to nest sort of in the center of that island. But sometimes if you've got a kayak or something, you can get in and see it. And Anne had a boat. She used to take us around in, which was great. And these are the little egret chicks on the nest. They're, just adorable. And then this is what they start growing fast. And these birds like to nest in colonies with other herons. And part of the reason for that is these chicks are on the nest a long time. So these nests can get kind of smelly, which attracts creatures like raccoons and snakes and river otters. And so all these birds that have these spears on their face, these long bills, they like to hang out together, but they also like to nest on an island that has water surrounding it and alligators in the water. And there are probably 8 to 10 alligators at any one time around these bird islands. And the birds know that the gators are there to prevent the raccoons and river otters and snakes from getting to the island. Every now and then, yes, it's sad, somebody falls in, but it's still a very important thing for the alligators. A raccoon family could decimate an island, eat all the eggs in one night. So it is very important that we keep our alligators around. And then they fly at about 6 to 7 weeks, but you see they're on the nest quite a long time. So that's why these colonies form for the birds to protect one another. And then we're going to alternate here. So Lorraine's going to talk now about the snowy egret.
Okay, the snowy egret. I have to say, when I first came to Florida back in 2013 and was walking along the beach, I spotted the snowy egret, and I was dazzled by this bird's yellow gold feet. I thought, what is this bird with the feet that look this ostentatious? And then when I found out later what they did with these feet, it was even more surprising. Basically, it's a small white heron, and it's not quite as showy except for the feet as the great egret, and it feeds in both wetlands and along the shore. As I said, I was walking along the shore when I first spotted this bird. And it does use its bright yellow feet in a very interesting way, which you'll see in a little bit here. In addition to the yellow feet, the lores, that area around the eye that Sandy talked about, is bright yellowish orange in the non-breeding state, and it makes a very nice contrast with the dark black bill. Actually, as big as this bird looks, it weighs less than a pound. And I'm always amazed at how light birds are in general, probably because of the fact that most of the bones are hollow. Now, they look very impressive sometimes as they're flying to and from rocks and other places as they're hunting their prey, and they've been called, quite rightly, the bird with the golden slippers. Now, I said I'd tell you more about this feeding behavior. You see in the upper left-hand corner, this bird is gliding along and dragging its feet across the surface of the water. And we think that they're using their feet sort of as a lure. And in the lower one you see is he's actually skimming along. He's bending down and picking up fish. So this is a very interesting feeding behavior for this bird. Their diet is mostly fish, but they can also eat frogs and other amphibians and insects, and he's got himself a pretty nice crustacean here. Now, getting into the breeding plumage, much like the great egret, this bird also develops these beautiful wispy feathers in breeding season, and these are the things that got them into so much trouble at the turn of the last century. It was really terrible what happened on the nests of these birds. The other thing that happens with the breeding is that, again, like the great egret, the skin around the eyes turns color, and when they get really deep into the breeding season, the lures turn a deep pinkish or almost reddish color. Now, the male and the female don't look much different. You really can't tell the two apart. When they go into the breeding season, though, the male usually starts the nest, and the female usually finishes it. She does an awful lot of the building of the nest. They both incubate the eggs, and it takes about 23 days or so. Now, they are called colonial nesters, just like the great egret, which means, again, that they nest in colonies with a lot of other birds. Here you see a little blue heron and a snowy egret, and there's quite a few of both of these in the Bird Rookery Islands, and I've been going down to the South Island quite often to look at them. They're really in a very intense nesting situation right now, and it's very loud and raucous. You'll hear a lot of disputes going on, and birds even stealing nesting material from other birds' nests. So it's really a lot of fun to go down there and watch this behavior. I think that might be it.
Okay. Okay, so Lorraine mentioned the little blue heron, and the reason we included this in here is there are two adult little blue herons. You'll notice how bright blue their bills are. This is the peak of their breeding colors. But when they hatch out, when the babies hatch out, as you'll see in this photo, the baby little blue heron chicks are white. And sometimes when they're nesting in close proximity to the snowy egret, it's often hard to tell these chicks apart. The bills are a little different color, though. You can see the black color of the snowy egret bill and the yellowish color of the little blue heron bills. They think the reason these babies are white for the little blue is that most of the little blue herons are solitary feeders. They don't like to feed with other birds. But the white birds seem to flock together. And in fact, a lot of times you'll see the juvenile little blue herons feeding with snowy egrets. It's like that's how they were, an adaptation that's been made. The white birds will feed with other white birds. So these little chicks that are all white grow up to be these beautiful blue birds. And here you can see the little blue feeding these white little chicks. This is a little blue heron chick with a standoff with some juvenile tricolor herons. So again, the little blue, the snowies, the tricolors are often nesting right off the South Islands there. And if you get a good pair of binoculars and you look closely, you can often see all these birds. The blue and these little, the tricolor herons, they almost blend in with the greenery of the island there, so they're sometimes hard to see. This is what happens to that white chick, though. After it starts to molt, and as it molts, it grows in blue feathers. At this stage, they're known as a calico. So this is about a one-year-old little blue heron. And it is quite you see these kind of polka dots start to form, and then here you can see the wings, feathers even. And the interesting thing about this is it's perfectly symmetrical. And the reason for that is that these blue feathers are a little stronger than the white feathers. If they didn't grow in symmetrically, the bird would probably fly in circles. So it is interesting that they have this color change and that it's so well adapted. They have about a 3.4 foot wingspan. So a lot of these small birds have really quite an impressive wingspan. And this is an adult then with the juvenile little blue. They do hang around. The interesting thing to note, though, is the color of the legs of this little blue heron are light green. That distinguishes it from the snowy egrets and some of these other white birds. If you see, and the bill of the bill of the juvenile and the adult is black on the tip. It looks like it's been dipped in an inkwell. So when you see a little blue heron with a white bird hanging around, look at that white bird's feet. It may be their juvenile offspring that's hanging around with them, which is pretty cool. All right.
Next, we have the cattle egret. And as Sandy pointed out, this bird is not actually a wading bird. However, it can be found close to wetlands, but it's much more often seen in grasslands and pastures and farmlands. And the reason is it's a really big insect eater. It can eat other things, but it eats a huge variety of insects. And they like to hang around cattle because there's a lot of insects that are around the cow patties and around the cows themselves, and they'll often even follow large farm machinery because the machinery, as it goes along in the fields, stirs up the insects, and it grabs them then. And they've even been known to jump on the backs of the cattle and remove ticks and flies right from the surface of the cattle. Now, it's a fairly inauspicious-looking bird when it's not in its breeding phase. It's relatively small. It has a short, thick neck, and as I said, it looks pretty nondescript. interestingly enough, these birds really came from Africa. They weren't native to here, but they were first spotted in nesting in Florida in 1953. And after that, they just spread all over the United States, and now they're even as far north as Alaska. I will say they're the least they're the least endangered of any of the birds that we're talking about. There's really quite a few of these. They've done very well. And she mentioned that a lot of small birds do have impressive wingspans, and you get some idea of that with this picture here. Now, the thing about the cattle egret, it looks so nondescript, just a small white bird when it's not breeding. But these birds undergo really dramatic changes in the breeding season. And you can see this is just starting here. This bird's developing a little bit of an orange look to the feathers on the top of his head and on his chest. And now the bill is starting to change. And it's becoming a little bit more intense, orange, actually reddish color. This also involves the legs, and in full breeding season, the legs get reddish as well. But why don't you see this next slide? Look at that. That is amazing. The final result occurs whenever the lores, that area around the eye, turn purple and the eyes turn red. So this bird is really gorgeous when it's in its full mating plumage. Now, just like the gray egret, the male usually starts the nesting procedure. He starts to grab up materials, and I've called this slide, "She Said Yes," because when he presents this to the female, if she accepts, they're a bonded pair at that point, and they start really getting down to business, making the nest. Again, she makes much of the nest, and they're monogamous for most of, for at least the season, probably not another year, but at least for that season. Now, the incubation period is only about 23 days, and look at the color of the bills on these babies. It amazes me that sometimes these chicks look so different from their parents. And these guys are at least white, but they've got the dark bills, but the bills start turning yellow very soon, and by the first fall, they're yellow. Notice also that this bird has started to lose all of that beautiful color in the bill already, and the feathers are becoming more white. He's just got a little faint orange on the top of his head and on his chest.
Okay, the white ibis. You guys probably see these everywhere. They are very well adapted to our urban society. This is the white ibis. They have that long downward curving bill. They like to forage in your yard, in wetlands, in swamps, even in parking lots. They seem to be everywhere. And they're about 2 feet tall, but they also have this wonderful color change in the breeding cycle. Sometimes, too, you may see a bird standing on one leg, like this one is. They've evidently identified this as the birds when birds are trying to stay warm. Most of their heat loss is through their legs. So if they curl up that one leg under their feathers, it protects them from cooling off a little too much. And this is a photo taken of the South Island of the bird nesting area. Birds nest, they roost year-round on these islands. They typically, when they're not it's not breeding or nesting season, they're there, they fly in at night, and then they fly out in the morning. So you really don't see them there all day long. Right now, because they're staking out nesting areas, they are on the islands, and so they actually are spreading out along the 3 islands that are there, which we call the bird rookery islands. The females choose where to build the nest within the colony. These are colony nests, which are a little different than these other birds. And the location of these colonies typically changes from year to year. And we've kind of seen that because we do bird nest counts every year. And this year it looks like almost all the white ibis are going to nest on the South Island, when in the past they've often nested on the North Island or the Middle Island. So they do kind of roam around a little bit. I guess the women are kind of picky, right? Anyway, they take about 7 days to build a nest. And here you can see, here's a male. This is on the South Island there. He's trying to rip a branch off, and you can see all of these other birds deep into this island trying to stake out their nesting area. This video was taken about a week ago. So they're very active on the South Island right now, trying to build all these nests, and it's really quite a sight to see right now. They forage in groups, they fly in groups, they nest in colonies, they're very social. The males gather to attract females, and they take group baths together to impress the females. They'll even do some aerial acrobatic tricks to try to impress the females. It's really amazing. They flip over and fly around. It's really amazing. And once mated, the male kind of shakes the head of the female, evidently. That's how you know that they have, that she said yes, I guess. They are all white except for these black tipped wings. You can see in this photo the little tip on the wings. You really don't see that when they're standing around, unless they've got an injured wing or something. And you can see that this beak on this one bird is starting to turn black on the tip. That's also part of the breeding colors. They will develop very red legs, very red skin around the eyes and beak, and then the beak will start turning black on the tip. And then you see this one that's in the front here with this pouch. That's a throat pouch. People used to say that that was a male, but in fact it can be found in either males or females, and is actually typically larger in the females, and it can expand to 2 to 3 centimeters. No one really, I don't think we know what it's for. It's just all part of this whole breeding color thing. And here's the black tip of the ibis. You can see that turns black. I used to think it was dirty. You know, you'd see them poking in the ground all the time. Now I know, no, it turns black. It is actually not a dirty bill. And you can't see this very well, but I'll have some other pictures. Right here in the center, this is a baby ibis. These are very, very difficult to see. I took this picture last year on the South Bird Island. Here's another picture. You can see here the bill is straight. It's not curved down, and it has an egg tooth on that. That's how a lot of these birds hatch out of their eggs. The bill will have a little tooth that then they lose, falls off after a few days. And in this case, these ibis bills develop 3 black rings around the bill at about 6 days, and then that bill starts to turn gray at about 6 weeks. So it's a very interesting transition in this bird in terms of the color of the bill. Also, these black feathers are replaced by brown, or the black down and the black feathers are replaced by down at about 2 to 6 weeks. Here again, here's the parents feeding these. The parents in this case feed the chicks for 40 to 60 days. So you're going to see a lot of these young birds on the island with the adults for a while. And then they start to turn brown, and here you can see some of the 2 brown birds. These are the young ibis that go from that black to that brown color. And then this is a wonderful picture that Lorraine took. After about 2 years, they start to molt into they'll molt completely into a white color. So it takes them 2 years to go from that black to the stage. In fact, sometimes you'll see an all brown ibis. You'll see one like this. You'll see one with just a few brown specks on it. They're all different ages of white ibis sometimes that are hanging around together, these juveniles. And sometimes people mix this bird up with the glossy ibis because it's brown. But in fact, these are two different birds. The bird on the left is the glossy ibis. We do have those here in Bonita Bay too. You don't see them nearly as often as you see the white ibis. But you can see how some people might confuse them, particularly when they're much younger and they're almost all brown for a while. So it's a very, but you can see the same bill structure on the glossy ibis. It looks, physically it looks the same, it's just different color. Here's the wood stork.
Okay, the wood stork. Now, the wood stork is about the same size, just maybe a little bit smaller than the great egret, and he has been described by some people as rather ugly. I've heard people say, oh, what an ugly bird. They do have a sort of prehistoric look with their naked head. It's sort of a grayish, blackish look when they're not breeding, but we'll see in a few minutes that that changes again in the breeding season. The bill also is long and black, but that also changes color in the breeding season. They do become more impressive, and we'll see that here in a little bit. Interestingly enough, they have a very, very specific, interesting breeding technique. They'll walk shallowly in the water or deeper, as you see here, and as they walk, they will use their feet to scratch things in the mud, and also sometimes stomp up and down to get things out of hiding. They'll use their wings, one wing sometimes or both wings together, to snap and startle prey. And they are what's known as tactile feeders. As soon as something touches their bill, it snaps shut with tremendous speed, 25 milliseconds. That's pretty fast. It's also a very strong snap.
I'll just hit again. Just hit the. You can hit the arrow again too. But it's.
Oh, just hit the arrow again?
Yeah, but that's. I think what you did is making it jerky.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
Let me just.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Let's just.
Just hit the picture again?
Oops, yeah.
Oh, well, that's not the right one. Go back.
No, it's just kind of jerky. Well, anyway, you'll get to see it here in a second.
See, he's wrestling up stuff from the bottom. Is that the end of it? Okay. Now, they can eat anything from very tiny things, look at the small fish on the bottom left, to larger fish at the top. They'll also eat amphibians and occasionally reptiles. As I found out in my backyard a couple months ago, the bottom picture on the right was taken in my backyard one morning when he nabbed himself a water snake. It took him quite a while to get this whole thing down, but he did get it down. Yeah, it was a struggle. I've also seen some of these birds get fish that were too big to swallow, and they'll work with them for quite a while, and then they end up having to drop them and leave them because they're just too big to eat.
It's done.
Is that done? Okay. Now, these guys have another curious habit of, first of all, they like to sit together. They nest together. They sit together sometimes on the ground. And they sit almost like a person on their haunches or on their elbows when they're resting. Very, very unusual. And sometimes they'll even lie in the grass. I've seen them do that in my backyard next to the water when they're just resting. And notice some of them have black beak here and some of them have an orangish color depending on the season. Now, this is what they start to look like as they start to go into full breeding color. The skin on the head gets a little bit more brownish. Their bill turns sort of a goldish, pinkish color. Their feet get more reddish. And look at that purple tail in the back. Very unusual. And here they are on the nest. Look at those red feet. The feet get really pretty bright. So here are the chicks. And I would say that they sort of have a face that probably only a mother or father woods torque can really appreciate and love. But these woods torques are known as indicator species. And the reason that they're called that is that they're very dependent on a very certain level of the water. So the water has to be just right. It's sort of the Goldilocks effect. If the water's too shallow, it won't do. If it's too deep, the fish aren't concentrated enough. So it has to be just right, because it takes about 440 pounds of food to raise a clutch of chicks per season. It's about 36 pounds per chick per season. And if these birds don't have the right water level, they may not even start to nest, or even worse, if they've started to nest, they may leave the nest entirely and just leave those chicks on the nest and fly away. So it's a very critical thing to have exactly the right amount of water. Here we see a juvenile, and his bill isn't quite black yet, and if you look closely, you can see the fuzzy feathers on his head. Right there. So he's still got some of the feather fuzz. And here we are in the air, and a lot of people don't realize that underneath the wings there is a lot of black. But they look pretty impressive when they're flying. They often ride the thermals and only have to flap their wings very intermittently. The wingspan is huge, 5 feet across. And here we are at the end of the day in nesting season, and they look pretty regal. He looks pretty regal there. That's it.
All right. The wood storks do not nest in Bonita Bay, as far as we know. They often nest inland
That's right.
on the top of the cypress trees. So they've historically had them out at Corkscrew Swamp, but as Lorraine said, it's very dependent upon the level of the water in wetlands, if they will even nest. And they don't nest as frequently as they used to out in Corkscrew because of the water levels declining so rapidly in the surrounding areas due to all the development and everything that's going on. So one other white bird we have here is the American white pelican. These guys are the ultimate snowbirds. They come down here in huge flocks. and migrate. We have them up in Minnesota where I see them in the summertime. They migrate all the way down here. They migrate from the mountains, and they breed in the summertime. They fly nonstop. They arrive here about October. Oftentimes you can see them along the shoreline on some of the mud flats. And by spring, like all snowbirds, they head north again. So they do have a fairly impressive commute. That's what it's They do not plunge into the water like the brown pelicans that you see. They're often in groups, and they just scoop up the fish by submerging their heads. And they will sometimes kind of herd fish as a group when they're in the water. So it's interesting that they have a completely different adaptation for feeding than the brown pelican. They do fly in these beautiful V formations. If you're down here in October, you'll often see them flying in from their trip from up north, and they're huge V formations of these birds. And as you saw in that first picture, they do have the black under their wings too. So you don't see wood storks usually flying in a V formation. So if you see a big bird with black wings, and this is a 9-foot wingspan, those are usually the white pelicans, very, very large wingspan. And then we have two rare white birds we wanted to show you. This is the great white heron. I took this photo several years ago right along the shore of the Bird Rookery Islands. If you notice, this bird has blue lures around its eyes. Remember that great egret we showed you had green lures around its eyes? That's one way you can tell them. During the breeding season, it's kind of easy to tell them apart. This is a comparison of these two, though. So there's the green lures around the great egret and the blue lures around the eyes of the great white heron. The great white heron is considered a subspecies of the great blue heron, and they will mate with each other. So here's the blue heron, and then you see the name, the genus species, and then the subspecies name, Occidental talus, is the great white heron. So these two birds are related. In fact, they're so closely related that they sometimes can mate together. And this, in fact, is a photo that Anne Macias had in her files. So you can see this is a white bird that mated with the great white heron that mated with the blue heron, and then they had two blue heron babies. So this would be a very unusual sighting. This is not very commonly seen. A lot of these great white herons are actually seen down more in the Keys than they are up here. So this was a very unusual sighting up here. And then this is another very unusual bird. This is the white morph of the reddish egret. So they have a white morph and a dark morph. They're not subspecies. It's just one has white color and one has the dark purplish color. But look at that beak. You can see the pink and the black tip. That is a real giveaway that these are the same birds, essentially. One's the white morph and one's the dark morph. We did have one year, I think it was in 2016, when the reddish egrets were nesting on the North Island. Ann Paul, who was director of Audubon Bird Sanctuaries at that time, had put out a call. If anyone saw some reddish egrets, she wanted to know where they were. She was doing a survey of them. There are probably only about 2,000 pairs of reddish egrets in the whole world, and they're just along the Gulf Coast. And she was up in Tampa. Her husband wrote the chapter in Birds of North America on the reddish egret, so she was looking for these nests. And at the time, Anne Macias saw this bird nesting on the North Island. So that was Ann Paul's first visit to Bonita Bay to see the reddish egret that we had nesting here. I don't think we've seen them since. That was a very unusual year. That they would normally nest out closer to the Estero Bay area or on the islands, on the mangrove islands out there. So what are the risks to these wading birds, or what were the risks and what are the risks today? Well, we mentioned the plume hunting. This was a real a devastating event for a lot of these birds. Even the white pelicans were hunted. There were a lot of birds that were incidental to the plume hunters, even the little blue herons, the tricolors. People favored the white feathers, but if they couldn't get those, they would take something else. And in fact, up in St. Augustine, they used to sell the wings of roseate spoonbills as fans. So this was just a devastating thing to the bird population here in Florida, and we're lucky that they are protected today. But today, the biggest problem is the loss of these shallow wetlands. So you can see how much, 200 years ago, we had lots of wetlands here, and now you can see how many of those shallow wetlands are lost. Not only is that a problem for birds, but it's a problem for us because our fresh water comes from the aquifer. And you need the water to soak into the ground and absorb into the aquifer where we dig the wells, where Bonita Springs Utility has these huge wells down Terry Avenue that go down 800 feet into these aquifers, and that's where our fresh water comes from. So the wetlands are very important. They're highly protected today. And we're lucky to have this unbelievable wetland in Bonita Bay, in the area known as the Salad Bowl. This was restored 2 or 3 years ago by the club. They spent a lot of money to get rid of all the cattails and the Carolina willow that were choking out this wetland. And today it's providing wonderful foraging for a lot of these white birds. And this is a picture of what you can see if you go up there. All these birds, there's some glossy ibis, there's a little young little blue, you can see the polka dotted bird up there. That's the little blue back there, the white ibis. Here's another little blue. Here's a snowy egret, great egret, great egrets dancing back here. It's really great if you haven't taken a chance to go up there.
And roseates as well.
Yeah, and the roseate spoonbills are there too. In fact, we do have we think there are some roseate spoonbills nesting on the North Island this year, which would be a first. We've never had a nest on the island. So let me show you where we're talking about here. Here's a map of, so this preserve area is what we call the Salad Bowl, and that was the area renovated or restored by the club. And then down here are the 3 bird islands. So here's the Salad Bowl area, and then here are the 3 bird islands. So this is surrounded on the north by Sandpiper, on the east by Hidden Harbor, and this is Oak Knoll, and there's a little bike path that runs right around the south edge here. And this is where you can see the bird, the little blue and the tricolor and the ibis nesting right now. So I'll show you the bike path here. So this is the island. There's from between these houses, there's a little bike path that goes from Hidden Harbor to Oak Knoll, and they are nesting there as we speak. So this is an aerial view of that. This shows you where the snowies, but also the little blue, the ibis, even glossies are nesting here. The middle island, the great blues really seem to like this island. We had a lot of anhinga on the North Island last year. We are going to be doing a bird nest counts again this year. We usually get that we can count. We only count what we can see. We don't count what we can't see it. We can't count it. We count 500 to 600 nests annually off of these islands. It is an unbelievably productive area, and in fact, these were man-made islands. These were not natural islands. They built. In fact, at one point there was a road over this area from Hidden Harbor to Oak Knoll in the plans. They took that out, and instead they put a few palm trees on these islands. And it just started. It started, generating. There's leather fern. There's some mangroves there now. There's buttonwood, knickerbean. I mean, it's just really impressive rookery now. So we're very lucky to have that and the wetland. So we've got both. We've got the nesting area and the wetland where the birds can feed, which is really a wonderful combination. And here we are. This is Lorraine and I with Ann Paul out doing the bird count in 2019. And that year we had 13 species and 622 nests. So it's really an amazing area. One of the other things that the Macias Wildlife Society does is we've created these bird signs around Bonita Bay. We have one on that path I showed you. There's one on the boardwalk out at Estero Park. There's one on the wall at the beach. And Lorraine's been working on one for the Salad Bowl area. I think Design Review Committee today just approved it. They're talking about maybe putting 2 benches up by the Salad Bowl and putting the sign up there, so it'll be a nice viewing area for everyone. I saw some people out there the other day with their own little, portable chairs, so I think people would like to have a place to sit there and watch this amazing wetland. So we are also going to do a couple of tours if you're interested. April 5th, 14th, and 20th at 4 p.m. We'll start at the Riverwalk parking lot. We'll do a little walk down the Imperial River, show you some of the native plants. We'll show you where the manatee pond is, and then we'll bring you over here to the South Island and we'll show you where the birds are nesting there if anyone's interested in doing that. So I think that's all we have. Yeah, so thank you very much for coming today. Are there any questions? Turn your mic off. Yeah. Here, take your mic.
Okay. You said that you couldn't tell the sex of the adults, but what about during the breeding season when they're
They both get colors.
They both get the same thing?
Yeah, you can't really tell difference between the males or females even in breeding season. Yeah. In some species, like the raptors, they look the same, but the eagles, the female's larger. But that doesn't seem to be the case with these herons. I think in the white ibis, sometimes there's the males are bigger, but it's even hard to tell there.
And the other thing is, what is the characteristic difference between an egret and a heron?
The difference between an egret and a heron, actually, they're in the same family. They're pretty much the same type of bird. Yeah, and they tend to hang out together, all the herons and egrets.
I just wondered how the salad bowl got its name.
Actually, yeah, I've asked that question too, and it's somebody named it that because there was a little bit of everything there. It's like a salad bar with all the different birds. It was just everybody just decided to name it the salad bowl.
And also my follow-up is I've noticed they've removed a lot of the invasive willow in that area, but as I walk, I still see more. Are they going to continue to remove more willow?
Yeah, actually, it turns out that the Carolina willow is not invasive. It is a native plant. However, like the cattail, which is also native, they can become a monoculture. And when they become a monoculture, then they crowd out other native plants. And because they're a very woody plant, they soak up a lot of water. So instead of that wetland area being allowed to for the water to soak into the ground, it's being sucked up by the Carolina willow and then put in the air through evapotranspiration. So actually right now, the last 2 days, they've been removing Carolina willow from the area between Egret's Landing and Bayview. And that was an area that had a lot of Carolina willow, and the board approved monies to remove that at the last board meeting. So, and the club is responsible for most of the salad bowl area. So they have removed a lot of that Carolina willow. That area behind the houses that were just built there, Hal's talked about removing that or working with the BBCA. I think they have to figure out who owns which land there. But I think, and actually there was just a talk at the Nature Club a couple weeks ago, and Dr. Sean Clem, who is the research director out at Audubon, Corkscrew Audubon Sanctuary, she showed some impressive slides of the 832 acres of Carolina willow that they have removed out there and opened up. And now, the black-bellied whistling ducks, the roseate spoonbill, all these birds are coming into the north area. You don't see it from the boardwalk, but it's the backcountry area is providing some wonderful habitat for feeding areas for those birds too. But it is a lot of work to remove Carolina willow. Yeah.
And you're talking about the Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary.
Yes, the
there.
Corkscrew
Yeah.
Swamp Sanctuary. yeah.
I happened to be there at that lecture, and I thought
Oh.
it was interesting that her modeling showed
Yeah.
the fact that it was really the Army Corps of Engineers in those canals
Right,
that have
right.
drained the water
Right.
out of that whole area, which has caused the water loss.
Right. Yeah, the Carolina willow did a little of it, but the bulk of it was due to canals, and that's the problem with all these canals that were built. They drained the wetlands, and in fact, one area, it's east of the Naples area, it's called the Picayune Strand. It was sort of ground zero for people buying swampland. They are in the process, they've got federal dollars, they're filling in the canals, they're removing the roads, they're restoring the wetlands. It's a huge project, but a very, very important wetland, again, for not only the birds, but for us. We need that area for that wetland water to soak into the ground. Anything in here?
Sandy, are you
Yep.
seeing any otters around?
Okay, the question was, are we seeing any otters around? Are we seeing any otters around? People see otters from time to time. Have you seen them, Penny, over in Anchorage there? Yeah. They kind of come up, I think, sometimes you'll see them, they come out of the river even, I think, the Imperial River, and sometimes you'll see their footprints on the little path that runs along the Imperial River. But yeah, occasionally you'll see them around, yeah. Did you have a question over here?
The spoonbills, where are they now? There were loads of them in the salad bowl at the end of January. Now I don't see them.
Yeah, they're there, actually.
Some days
It-
they're there
yeah,
more than others.
right,
but
yeah.
Most days you'll see at least one or two.
Yeah.
And sometimes three or four.
And I do think they're starting nesting here too, so they're probably building nests and mating and,
Next few
yeah,
months, I think.
especially if they have chicks on the nest. And it does appear as though we might have two pair nesting on the North Rookery Island in Bonita Bay here. So that's a first. If we get roseate spoonbills nesting, I don't think anyone's ever documented that here before. Usually, they like to nest offshore in the mangroves and feed in the freshwater wetlands. That's what they do in Florida Bay, down, toward the Keys down there. And they nest offshore. They too are an indicator species, as Lorraine mentioned, the roseate spoonbill and the wood stork. They need the water to be just right, about 13 inches. Because they have to bump into their food, and if they can't, they won't nest. And they found that to be true of both the roseates and the wood storks. So you may see them around as we get more into the feeding season.
When does breeding season start and when does it end?
Good question. I asked that I've asked that question of Ann Paul, the expert on birds, because I said, and this year it seems really early. Normally we have not seen these little blues and the white ibis and the snowies on the South Island nesting this early. In fact, usually our bird count is done the end of April, which we've historically considered the peak of the nesting season. But what Ann says is, we live in the subtropics here, and the birds will nest when they feel healthy and when they know there's feeding areas. Now, we're lucky down here because we do have these wetlands around that have what? Up in Tampa, she said the birds are not nesting yet because it's so dry up there. It's a drought that the birds up there are waiting. They're waiting till they have these better wetlands to feed in. So we're lucky that we're getting the nests right now. And then I said, well, if we've got birds nesting now and then we'll have them in April, how do we count the nests? So she said, well, what you need to do is go out now and count them. So let's say we count 25 little blue heron nests now. And when we do at the end of April, we only find 5. Well, we would take that peak number. So we'd count 25 as the count. Because she said, what you're trying to do is figure out the productivity of the area. You don't add it together because you don't know if you're counting them twice. But if you take the peak, you take the big number, then you would have a better estimate of how many nests you would have of any species in that area. So like right now we have a lot of great blue herons on the North Island. they might be even fledged and gone by the end of April. So they breed early. They breed early than a lot of the other birds. They often are breeding in February and nesting in February, while these other birds usually wait a little longer. Yeah.
Do they build a nest before they mate, or mate and then build a nest?
Well, sometimes the male starts a nest. It's sort of like, trying to entice the female in. But usually the nest building is a collaborative effort, and the males bring the sticks in. In fact, it was really funny. Some of my friends who live up in Sandpiper were putting out sticks for the great blue herons, because they build pretty big nests. So they were collecting sticks and putting them along the shoreline, and the great blue herons were taking them. And then they had some plants that they were trying to prevent the landscapers from cutting. So they put the flags, the metal, the flag on the metal, little wire. And the great blue herons started taking the metal flag, the little metal wires. So they were really desperate for nesting material, I guess. But usually the male will bring the stick to the nest, and then the female places it. And sometimes even some of these bigger birds, osprey, the male may bring in a stick and she may just throw it out. They kind of reject sticks sometimes. So usually it's kind of a collaborative effort, but sometimes the male will start the nest. And sometimes he won't even attract a mate. He'll just be standing there, preening and everything. And
But
they
finish the nest before they actually mate?
well, yes, it sort of happens simultaneously. As they're building the nest, they're mating, and once they get the nest built, they'll lay the eggs. Yeah.
I might mention
Oh, yeah.
that with this osprey nest that I've been watching up close to the salad bowl, the male seems to be obsessed with keeping the sides of that nest up high enough that the chicks don't fall out. And while that nest has been there for quite some time and they have chicks there, I often see him flying in with bits and pieces of things to add to the nest.
Yeah.
So he's shoring it up as time goes on. So that can happen too.
One other question. It's a great blue heron question.
Yeah.
We live in Egret's Landing and look out on the salad bowl. And the other day, I saw a great blue actually sit on and push under another one, it looked like it was trying to kill it. And finally, the other one did manage to get away, and it stayed very low and hid. Have you ever seen that happen where they try to really hurt each other?
These were two adults.
Two adults.
Could have been mating. The mating can be pretty aggressive too. I don't know. The mating, yeah,
The mating. I've taken pictures of the mating, and what usually happens with that is that the male gets on top of the female and grabs the back of her neck
With his beak.
with his beak, but it's
Okay.
it's a pretty aggressive sort of situation. But I haven't seen them look like they were trying to injure it.
No. By the way, I did see a great blue heron eat a rat the other day. It was amazing. He went into a bush, pulled this thing out, and I have a video of it. I should have probably included it, but he kept like dipping it in the lake, and then he would kind of crimp its neck, and then he'd drop it in the water. And if it started swimming, he'd pick it up again and keep crimping its neck until he finally swallowed the whole thing. But good. We don't have to put rat traps out, right? We have more great blue herons. All right. Yes, back here. Let me give you.
How long does it take for them to lay an egg, and then how long to incubate it?
Okay, so how long to lay an egg and how long to incubate it? Well, if you notice, some of these incubations were maybe 23 to 25 days. And it probably doesn't take that long. I don't know. Lorraine's an OBGYN. How long does it take him to make the egg, Lorraine?
Well, I think the egg is formed inside the body over days' time, but the actual act of laying it doesn't take all that long unless there's a problem. And sometimes birds can become egg-bound, which is a bad situation. But in the normal situation, after the egg is already formed, it comes out, I think, within, maybe an hour or two. But it does take some days to form inside the body.
And then some of these big birds are laying them sequentially too. So they're forming sequentially. Yeah, they're not all the same day. Yeah.
And the problem
Yeah.
with that, the problem with them being laid sequentially like that is that the birds are different ages, and the ones that hatch first have a much better advantage over the ones that come later, particularly the last little guy. And if food is scarce, the first one or two or three, if there's 4 or 5, get the majority of the food, and sometimes they'll even start a siblicide, if you will. They'll kill the smaller one, and the parents don't seem to be too concerned about this. They don't try to feed the ones that aren't getting enough food, because I think the idea is they want it's the strongest, the fittest that are going to live, and they don't want to put, if particularly if food is scarce, they don't want to expend energy and resources on birds that may not live anyway. But definitely the ones that hatch first are the ones that have the distinct advantage.
Yeah, on this North Island where the great blue herons, I've even seen the oldest a chick push the other chicks aside when the adults arrive at the nest to feed them, and block the way for the parents to get to the younger chicks. So that oldest chick does have a significant advantage in these big birds. Yeah. Anyway, okay. Well, thanks everyone.